Start with the big story that we're tracking on WION at this hour, where the beleaguered Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is facing charges of fraud, has said that he will not resign despite being now formally charged with bribery, fraud and breach of trust in a corruption scandal. Now, the incumbent Prime Minister has denounced the charges as an attempted coup against him. Now, this is the first time in Israel's history that a sitting Prime Minister has been charged with allegations of bribery.
כי הערב אנחנו עדים לניסיון של הפיכה שלטונית נגד ראש ממשלה בעלילות שווא ובתהליך חקירות מזוהם ומגמתי.
So what are the charges against Netanyahu? Now, the incumbent Prime Minister has some serious charges that have been leveled against him of bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Now, the allegations against Netanyahu range from receiving gifts worth thousands of US dollars to a deal to change regulatory frameworks in favor of a certain media group in exchange for favorable press coverage on him. Netanyahu is suspected to have struck a deal with the owner of Israel's daily newspaper to receive some favorable media coverage. Another case also says that Netanyahu had made decisions benefiting the Israeli media mogul Shaul Ilovich. Now, Ilovich is the controlling shareholder in Bezeq, which is Israel's largest telecommunications firm. Now, this was in exchange reportedly for some positive coverage on Vala News, a website owned by Ilovich. Now, yesterday, Israel's Attorney General had formally charged Netanyahu with corruption, bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Now, the indictment came after a 4-day hearing with Netanyahu's defense team last month, followed by weeks of intensive discussions at the Attorney General's offices.
היום הזה הוא יום קשה ועצוב. היום הודעתי לבאי כוחו של ראש הממשלה, מר בנימין נתניהו, על החלטתי להעמידו לדין בכתב אישום הכולל 3 אישומים. יום שבו היועץ המשפטי לממשלה מחליט על הגשת כתב אישום נגד ראש ממשלה מכהן בגין עבירות חמורות של שחיתות שלטונית, הוא יום קשה ועצוב מבחינת הציבור בישראל ומבחינתי באופן אישי.
All right, now, Israeli law does not require Netanyahu at this stage to step down from the position of being the Prime Minister. Now, the entire process of an indictment and a trial could take place over a span of few years. Netanyahu could in fact face up to 10 years in prison and or a fine for bribery charges alone, while fraud and breach of trust carry a prison sentence of almost 3 years as well. And now to add more perspective in terms of these big developments that have taken place in Israel, we are joined by Arsen Ostrovsky, who is a Middle East expert and also a foreign policy analyst, who is joining us live from Tel Aviv in Israel. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Ostrovsky, for joining us here on this broadcast from WION. And let me begin by asking you this. Now, after having been formally charged of these serious allegations of bribery, fraud and breach of trust, let me begin by asking you, how does this politically impact Benjamin Netanyahu at a time when he's already beleaguered?
Look, thank you for having me on. It's difficult to tell. I think Israel is really heading into some tremendously uncharted waters. It's a situation that we've never been in before. A lot of people are waking up this morning. It's 7:30 here in Israel now, and wondering, where do we go from here? This is quite a historic moment. It's the first time in the nation's history, I think, as you noted in the introduction, that a sitting prime minister has been indicted with such serious criminal charges. And on the one hand, it's a very dark day because of that. It's a very serious day, very sad day. On the other hand, many also looking at it as a triumph of democracy. The fact that, Israel does have a thriving democracy where no one, not even the Prime Minister, is above the rule of law. It's difficult to say how this will play out in the coming weeks, let alone days, because you also have to look at it in the context of an ongoing attempt to form a government where Israel has been unable to in the last several months, and certainly more or less over the last year, where there's been essentially a sense of paralysis in government, with a second election having been held only a few months ago, and Prime Minister Netanyahu was not able to form a coalition. His main opponent, Benny Gantz, was not able to form a coalition, and the mandate has now gone back to the Knesset, which has another 20 days or so in which to form a government. If that is unable to, then it will go to a third election. Now, all this, there's a terribly, tremendous amount of grey territory here that's just unclear and untested. Netanyahu would need to step down from his multiple ministerial portfolios. However, as Prime Minister, he is allowed to stay on in this position, but it's not clear entirely how this will play out in the form of coalition building. I suspect that the opposition parties will put quite a strong line in the sand and saying that they will, as they've said in the past, that they will not serve under Prime Minister that's under indictment. And on the other hand, I think it will only reinvigorate his Likud base.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, Netanyahu for himself, he gave a 15-minute address where he came out and said that this was essentially the judiciary and the police plotting against him with politically motivated allegations. Give us a sense as to how this story is being viewed within Israel.
Look, it depends who you ask. You can take one of two positions here. On the one hand, his supporters are looking at it that way. They're looking at it, as the Prime Minister said, that this is an attempted coup. This is an attempt by elements in the media, by elements in the judiciary and the investigative authorities who he says are deeply biased and politically charged, attempting to bring down a sitting Prime Minister by non-democratic means when they were unable to do so at the election polls. His supporters are saying, look, this is a Prime Minister that's devoted his life to this country, he fought for this country, he's brought security to this country, a growing economy, diplomatic opportunities, and he deserves to be treated with greater respect, not as a form of political witch hunt. On the other hand, there are those who are saying that, enough is enough, that a Prime Minister should not sit under this kind of cloud of corruption, that he needs to step down and fight these charges.
Absolutely, indeed. And also, help us understand as to how these charges that the Prime Minister now faces will impact the Likud party in Israeli politics.
Look, that again remains to be seen. Prime Minister is, he's tremendously popular within the Likud party. There have been one or two very, I suppose, quiet voices indicating a possible challenge. The primary one is Gideon Sa'ar, who's a former minister. He stepped down initially some time ago, but then he came back into the Knesset, and he's always, certainly for the last few years, has been considered as the Prime Minister's key rival. And Gideon Sa'ar said only yesterday that that in the event primaries are held for the Likud party, as he believes they should in these circumstances, that he would run and challenge the Prime Minister. The question is whether he has the support within the Likud party, and that's questionable at this stage, whether he has the support to unseat the Prime Minister as the head of the Likud party.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Arsen Ostrovsky, for joining us from Tel Aviv and getting us this perspective into this big developing story. This, of course, will be a story that will be following very closely indeed.